Now, so far in all of our Vue applications, we've declared any and all data inside the components themselves right here, like this. Now, more often than not, when we create websites, that data will be stored somewhere else instead, like in a database. And we normally have to fetch that data from an API endpoint or something like that. So in this small chapter, I just want to show you how we can fetch external data from inside a Vue component. Now, to begin with, we won't be working with a database because I don't want to introduce too many concepts at one time. So instead, we'll use a package called json-server to simulate an API that we can make requests to. So json-server basically allows us to use a simple JSON file like this containing data as a database resource with various different endpoints. So for example, I could create a JSON file called db.json with blog data inside it. I would then use json-server to watch that file and provide us with local API endpoints to interact with whatever resources we define inside that file. So json-server basically wraps our JSON file with API endpoints, and it gives us these endpoints so we can interact with this data. In this case, it would be /blogs to get all of the data. That would be a GET request. If we wanted to add new data, we'd send a post request to /blogs. To get a single blog, we'd go to /blogs/ID. So it provides these endpoints and more as well to interact with this data. And then we can do that locally from our Vue components. So json-server really just allows us a quick way, an easy way to work with local data that simulates how an API behaves. It's very good for learning, practicing and developing, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So the first thing I'm going to do to set this up is to create a db.json file. Now I'm going to create this in the root of the project, and generally when I work with data like this, I create a data folder and then I place it inside there. So let me create a db.json file. And by the way, you don't have to call it db, call it what you want. db just stands for database since we are storing data in it. Okay, so for those of you who have never worked with JSON before, it's very similar to how a JavaScript object looks. So it would start with curly braces, much like an object, and then we have key value pairs. But there are a couple of subtle differences. First of all of the keys must be in double quotes, and that's not the case in JavaScript objects. So when we create a key, we put it in double quotes like this. Now, when we're creating a JSON file for json-server, any top level keys are seen as resources. So for example, we want a jobs resource, and that would be the key. So this is going to be an array of data. Now what I'm going to do is just paste in 3 different objects so you don't have to watch me type them out from scratch. Now, I wanted to just quickly mention the other difference as well in JSON than a JavaScript object, and that is that when we use a string as a value, the string must be in double quotes as well. If this was single quotes, it wouldn't be valid JSON. So, this is our JSON file for the jobs resource. Now, if we had multiple different resources, for example, we could have jobs and we could have something else like blogs, then we just create another top level property like this, and then when we watch this with json-server, it would see we have 2 different resources and we could interact with both of those. So we only want one resource. I just wanted to show you that you could do that. I'm going to save it and close this off. The next thing we need to do is install the json-server package locally inside this project. Now to do that, we need to open up a terminal. Now I already have the local host for the Vue application running right here because we ran before npm run serve. So I need to open up a new terminal by clicking this button right here. And then over here I'll say npm install. This is how we install a package locally, and the package is called json-server. Now, if you've got a really old version of Node, I think it's version 4 or less, anything less than 5, then you'll also have to use the save flag like so. But if you've got a newer version of Node, then you don't have to do that. So I'm going to press enter, and that's going to install the package locally into the computer. And it's local because we didn't use the -g flag, which stands for global, and that would install something globally on our computer. This was just locally. So now, if we take a look inside package.json, we can see that json-server is now a dependency. That's been installed and it will be stored inside the node modules folder. So how do we actually use this to watch a file? Well, it's pretty simple. All we need to do is come down here in the terminal and say json-server, like so, space, and then -- watch to watch a file, and then the name of the file, the path to the file. Now, in our case, that's in the data folder /db.json. So I'm going to press enter, and now we can see that it's spun up a local development server on port 3000. That's different from our Vue website, which is on port 8080. So the JSON server is using port 3000, and then the endpoint to get the jobs is /jobs. If we had multiple resources, then we would have different endpoints. Let me just demonstrate that. I'm going to go to db.json and add in another resource again. So let me just say blogs, and that is going to be an empty array. Save that, and now we can see we have two different resources down here. So JSON server was watching this file for changes, it's noticed another resource, and it's given us an endpoint for that as well. We don't need it, so I'm just going to remove it again, and we're just going to use jobs. But if we now open this up in a browser, then it's going to send a GET request for this resource right here, and it's going to send back JSON with all of these different objects included. So let me try that. I'm going to open this up in a browser over here. I'm going to control click to do that. And now we can see we get all of this JSON back in the browser. Now, typically, we don't want to be sending GET requests for our JSON inside the browser address bar like this. What we want to do is send those requests from our components, for example, inside the jobs component right here, where we have all of these jobs. We want to send it from this component to retrieve that data so we can cycle through the data in the template and output it on the screen. So we're going to start that process in the next lecture. So now we have our db.json file with all our data in it, and we set up the JSON server to watch this and give us access to endpoints to interact with it and get the data. Let's try fetching the data from the jobs component. Now, at the minute, we're just creating the data directly inside this component, but typically when we make a project, we wouldn't do that. Our data might change over time and it would be stored in something like a database. Now, we're not using a database in this case, we're just using JSON server, but we will use databases later, and the concept of fetching the data from an external source are still the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is delete the data inside this jobs array. Now, I will keep the jobs property because ultimately we want to cycle through those jobs to output them to the screen. All we're going to do is fetch the data from this external source, and then we're going to populate this jobs property with that data. And then once it has that data, we can cycle through them. All right. So the first question is, where do we get this data? At what point? Well, a popular place to get it is inside the mounted lifecycle hook. Remember, a Vue component has lifecycle hooks which fire at different points during its lifecycle. The mounted one fires when the component mounts the DOM. So at that point, we're going to go out and fetch the data. Now, to do this, we'll be using the fetch API. Now, if you don't know much about fetch or promises or asynchronous JavaScript in general, definitely check out the last chapter in this whole course where I talk about different JavaScript features. I cover fetch and promises right there. So if this is confusing, check that out. So we need to pass in an endpoint to the fetch method, and that endpoint is provided to us by JSON server right here. So it's this thing to get all the jobs. So I'm going to highlight that and copy it, and I'm going to paste it inside here, inside a string, like so. So this is going to go out and fetch that data for us and return it in JSON format. Now, this is asynchronous and it returns a promise. So what I'm going to do is tack on a then method which fires a callback function after this is done. Now, this returns an object with JSON data included in it. Now, in order to actually get that data, that JSON, and pass it into JavaScript, we need to take the response, which we get as an argument here, and we need to use the JSON method on it. So we say response.json. This is how we work with the fetch API. Now, when there's only one argument inside the callback function, we can remove the parentheses, which is what I'm going to do. And this thing right here, this is also asynchronous, and that also returns a promise. So all we need to do is tack on another then method, which will fire another function when this is complete, and this function gets access to a different argument, and that is the actual parsed data. So whatever data we have right here, we get back. All right, so it's going to be an array of objects. So what do we want to do with that data? Well, all we want to do is populate this array right here with that data. Remember, this is an array of data. So all we need to say is this.jobs to get the jobs property that we have right here and set it equal to the data that we get back, which is an array of JavaScript objects, an array of jobs. And that's all we need to do. Now, since this might error, if something is wrong with the asynchronous task, we can tack on a catch block, which will fire a function if there is an error, and we get that error back as an argument inside this function. All I'm going to do is console.log the error.message if there is one. So every error that we get back will have a message property which tells us what the error is. All we're doing is logging that out if there is an error. So now let's see if this works. Hopefully everything should still look the same. We should see on the page these 3 jobs. So let me save this and preview, and this is the endpoint. We don't want that. I'm going to go to Ninja Jobs and then go to Jobs, and we can see we still have all of these 3 jobs. And if I hard refresh, we can see for a second it's blank while it makes the fetch, and then once we have the data, it outputs them. Because remember, to begin with, the jobs is just an empty array. It's only after we have the data right here that we populate that array, and then we can output it. Okay, so that's how we get external data. We can make a fetch request inside the mounted hook to update a property, then cycle through that property to output it to the screen. Now, I also want to make a fetch request inside the job details component, because currently all we're doing is outputting the ID over here. And we can see on a job details page, we see the job ID is 2. Now, I want the full data of that job. I want all of this stuff right here for that job, so we can output the job title and the details, even though it's just one word. So I'm going to have to make another fetch request over here inside this component to get the job with the ID that we have right here. So again, let's do a mounted hook, and this is where we're going to fetch the data. So what I will do is go back to jobs and just copy all of this fetch request right here and paste it in right here. Now this time the endpoint has to be a bit different because we don't want all jobs, we just want a single job. So in order to get a single job, it has to be / and then whatever the ID is of the job we want to get. So in our case, it would be this right here, the ID of 2, if we were on this page. Now we have the ID, remember, we accept it as a prop when it's passed in as a wrap parameter. So we can use it and we can tack it on the end by saying plus this.id. This because we reference the component, and ID because we have that as a prop. All right. So now this will be either 1, 2, or 3, depending on what job we're trying to view. We're getting the response, we're parsing the JSON, then that data will this time be either an object, which is this job, or this job, dependent on the ID. And so we have access to that object. Now what I'd like to do is store that object inside some component data. So I'm going to create a data function, and inside this return an object. We need our comma after data, don't forget that. And I'm going to create a property called job. Now to begin with, that will be null. But once we have this data back from the fetch, I'm going to say this.job, not jobs, is equal to that data. So this will now be a JavaScript object, which represents one of those jobs. And we're also catching the error if there is one and logging it to the console. So now I have this job. We could maybe output those job details on the page because we have these different properties. We have the title and the details which we can use. So instead of this in the H1, I could output maybe the job title like so. And then at the bottom, I could do a paragraph and output the job details as well, like so. Now, if we try this in a browser, let me just save it, we're going to get an error, and I'll explain that in a second. First of all, let me just refresh over here. And notice now we don't get anything at all. Now, if we open up the console, then we're going to see an error over here. And if we scroll up, that error says, cannot read property title of null. So inside our template, we're saying job.title, and we can't do this because it's saying we can't get the title property from null. But why is this null? Because we're trying to retrieve a job object. Well, it's null because to begin with, when we first load the component, we set the job to be null. We only have a value for the job when we retrieve it using the fetch API, and that takes a second or so to get. So to begin with, when we first load the page, we're trying to output the title property of null. It's only when we have a value for the job that we can do that. So we need to figure out a way to conditionally output this stuff right here only when we have a value back from the fetch request. And we'll see how to do that next. So we ran into the problem whereby this was causing an error because to begin with, the job is null and we can't access the title property on null. That makes no sense. It's only after the fetch request has completed and we update the value of the job to be the data that we get back that we can do this. So we want to only output this once we have a value for the job. And to do this, we're going to use v-if. Now we've seen this in the past whereby we can use the v-if directory to only output a certain amount of templates if a condition is true. So I'm going to create a div first of all, and then I'm going to say v-if on this div and set it equal to something. Now remember, if the thing inside this is true, then it will show whatever inside the div. If it's false, then it won't show this div and whatever is inside it. So I'm going to set that equal to job. Now to begin with, job is null, and null is a falsy value. So it won't show this div and everything inside it to begin with. And then when we assign a value to the job using the data we get back from this fetch, then this will have a value, and since it has a value, it will evaluate as true. Any kind of value will be true. So now this would only output if we have a value for job. And at that point, we can say this, job.title and job.details, because then job will be one of these objects. So let's try this out now. Hopefully now we won't get an error. I'm going to save it and refresh. And now we can see the title and the details. All right, cool. Now we could also, if we wanted to, add a v-else. So I could say div, and then I'm going to say v-else. And so if this is not true, which it isn't to begin with, then we can output something like loading job details. So I'll do a paragraph tag and say loading job details, ... like so. And if I refresh over here, you'll see that flash up, this bit right here, for a split second until we have the data. And then once we have the data, it replaces that with the job data. So watch this. Very quickly, very quickly, impossible to see. But if you've got a slower connection, perhaps you'll see it for longer than I did. But either way, it was there. Now I'm going to do something very similar inside the jobs component. And I only want to output this stuff right here once we have jobs. Now, it doesn't really matter so much in this case because we have an array and that has a value. It's just that we can't cycle through an empty array. So even though it tries this, there's no jobs in there. It's not going to error. It's not going to cause an error, which is why we don't need to do a v-if around this. But I'm going to do a v-if around it so that I can do a v-else as well, so I can output loading jobs until we have the data. So let me now do a div at the top, and I'll say v-if is equal to jobs, and not just jobs, because it does have a value, and this will be truthy, but jobs dot length. Now this will be falsy because it doesn't have a length. There's nothing in it to begin with. All right. So if I copy all of this stuff right here, where we cycle through the jobs, inside that, now this is only going to be output once there is a length inside here. Now I can do another div, and I can say v-else on that. And so if this is false, which it is to begin with, then I can output instead a paragraph tag saying loading jobs ... All right, so let's see if we have better luck with this. I'm going to go to jobs, and okay, we didn't see that, but I think I'll hard refresh. And you could see it for a split second again. It said loading jobs. Watch this. Split second, loading jobs. So now we show this until the jobs are ready, and then we show the jobs. Okay, so that's how we can conditionally output template when we're waiting for data that we fetch. Now there's multiple ways of doing this, of waiting for data, especially in Vue 3. We might use a few different ways as we go forward. This is just one of them. Alright then, so it's time that we put everything together that we've learnt so far, including stuff on the Vue router, web forms and fetching data, to create our second full project, which looks something like this. It's a project planner where we can list projects and we can click on a project to see more details. We can also mark projects as complete by clicking the tick icon right here. That turns it green. We can untick them as well to mark them as ongoing. We can filter them by completed, the green ones, and ongoing, the red ones. We can edit projects by clicking on this icon, the pencil, and update them right here. We can delete projects by clicking on the trash icon. And finally, we can add new projects. For example, make a new website, add some details, add the project, and we see that right here. So this is what we're going to be building in this chapter. So, like the last project we created, I thought I'd give you a quick bird's eye view of the structure of this project in terms of components and routes that we're going to use. So, like always, we're going to start at the top with the root app.vue components. Then we're going to nest inside that different route components because we will be using the Vue router. And the first one is the home component for /. That will list all of the different projects. Then if we go to /add, we see the add project component. That's for the web form to add a new project. And if we go to /project the ID parameter, where the ID parameter is the ID of a particular project, we see the edit project component, which will be a web form to edit that particular project. Now, nested inside the home component, there will be two more. We have the filter nav. That will be the navigation at the top of the list of projects, and if we want to filter them by completed or ongoing, we can use that. We also have the single project, that should be not product component, and that will represent a single project in the list. Finally, we're also going to have a navbar component at the top of the app component as well. So the next step is to actually create this new project, and to do that, navigate to the directory you want to create it in, and we type vue create and the project name, which will be project-planner. Press enter, and we want to manually select features. We want to use the Vue router, so press spacebar on that, and I'm going to press spacebar on this to unselect it. Press enter, and we want the version 3 of Vue. We're going to say yes for history mode and a dedicated config file, and we don't want to save this as a preset. Okay, so now let's cd into project-planner, and then I'm going to say code space full stop, press enter to open this up in Visual Studio Code. Alright then, so let's take a look at this project. So like last time, inside the source folder we should have the router folder, and inside that we have our different routes. Now I'm going to delete the about one because we don't want that for now. We'll just stick with the home page and we'll keep this route the same. We're also going to keep the home view as well right here, but we are going to delete the about one. Now if I go inside the home view, I'm going to delete a lot of this. So let me get rid of this stuff right here. We don't need the image and we don't need the hello world component. And inside here, I'll just say home like so. Now also, we don't need this hello world component registering here or importing here at the top of the script. So let's get rid of that and save it. Now I want to cross those two things off and then go to the app.vue. This is the root component. I'm going to get rid of this nav at the top because I'm going to create my own navigation later on, and then I also just want to add in a couple of different styles and get rid of these styles right here. I don't want the nav ones. Now inside the app, I don't want to text align everything to the center, so I'm going to get rid of that. Instead, what I'm going to do is give this a max width of 600 pixels, and then I'm also going to give this a margin of 0 top and bottom, auto left and right. And what that does is place this 600 pixel column width in the center of the page with auto margin and the left and the right. Now the color of the text right here is going to be 555, which is a gray color instead of that bluey color. Now finally, I just want to apply a background to the body, and that is a very light grey colour. So I think that's just about it. We can also get rid of the Hello World component inside this components folder. We're not going to use that. And now we can go ahead and run this by opening up a terminal and typing npm run serve. And now if I open this, we should be able to see in a browser over here. Okay, so very basic at the minute. But next up, we're going to tackle the home view and data. Okay then, so next up, I'd like to create some data for this project, the different projects that we're going to list on the page. And again, we're going to use json-server to do this, but I promise in the future, we will be using databases instead. But for now, let's just create a data folder inside the root of the project. And then inside that, I'm going to create a new file called db.json to store our data inside. Okay, so inside this file, I want to paste in my JSON, and it's very, very simple. Remember, it starts with curly braces, then the resource name as a key, and it has to be in double quotes. All of the keys do, in fact. The resource value is an array, and inside that array, we have different objects, and there's 2 in total. Each one must have an ID, and we also have a title, details, and a complete property as well. Now these are self-explanatory, but this one right here, this dictates whether the project is complete. Now later on we're going to style these differently, so if a project is complete, then it's going to be green in color. If it's not, it's going to be reddish. So then, that is our data. Next we need to install the JSON server into this project, because remember, we install it on a project by project basis. We don't install it just to our computer once and then use it in whatever project we want to. We install it to each project. It becomes a dependency of each project. So let's do that in a new terminal by clicking this button and typing npm install json-server. And once that's done, we can type in json-server space /watch space, and then we go into the data folder /db.json and press enter to watch that file. And now we have access to this endpoint right here, which we can use inside our home component, because this is where we're going to list that project data. So the first thing I'm going to do here is create our mounted hook, because this is where we're going to fetch our data once the component has mounted the DOM. So inside here we can use the fetch API and pass in the endpoint we just copied, and that's going to get us all the projects. Now this is asynchronous. It takes some time to do, returns a promise, so we can tack on a then method whereby we get the response in a callback function, and then we want to take the response and pass the JSON, much like we have been doing in the past. Now we also want to tack on a then method to this, because this is asynchronous, and then we fire a callback function over here with the actual data, and with that data we want to update a property in our component. Now let's create that property by using the data function, and then we need our comma at the end of this before mounted. Inside here, return an object whereby we have a projects property. Now to begin with, that will be an empty array, but we're getting back here an array of projects. So we can say this.projects is now equal to the data we get back. So at this point, once we fetch that data, we're updating this array with the array of data we get back here from db.json. So these projects, okay? So we also want to tack on a catch block, and that will fire a function where we're taking the error as an argument, and all we'll do is log that to the console just in case there is some kind of error. You could output the error message if you wanted to, like this. Okay, so now we have this fetching the data and updating this property. Now what we need to do is output all of the projects after we have them. So I only want to do this if this has a length. If it doesn't have a length, there's no point in us trying to cycle through the projects. So let me first of all delete this text, home, and then next create a div. And this div is going to have viv attached to it. And I'm going to set that equal to projects.length. So now, if this is an empty array, this will be false, and it won't show this div and anything inside it. If this has elements inside it, after we've fetched the data and assigned it right here, then this will be true. It will have length. So then it will output whatever is inside this div. Okay, so inside here we want to cycle through the projects. So another div, and we'll use v4 to cycle through them. And I'm going to say for project in projects. Remember, this can be called what you want. I just call it the singular of whatever we're cycling through. We also need the key property, and that's why we're getting this error at the minute. And we bind to the key because this is going to be a dynamic property, and it's going to be the project.id. Remember, this must be unique for each item. In our case, this is unique because in the data, each project has a unique ID right here. Okay, so we have the key. Inside this div now, we want to output the project title. So I'm going to do a paragraph tag to do that, and then just say project.title. So none of this really should be new, which is why I'm going through this a little bit quicker. All we're doing is grabbing the data in the mounted hook, updating the projects. Then when we have the projects, we're looping through them, and we're outputting the title for each one. So if we save this and preview, we should see the title for each project. And we only have 2. But that's fine, that's all we need for now. So now we have that data showing on the screen. Next, we're going to focus on these individual projects and create a little component that we can use for each one of them. Okay then, so now inside the home component for the home page, we are fetching the data and we're updating the project's property, and then we're cycling through that to list out the title of each project. Now, each project should have a bit more template than just a paragraph tag for the title. And what I'd like to do is externalize this template in a separate component, a reusable component. So what I'm going to do is create this inside components, because it's not going to be a view in itself. It's just going to be a reusable component that we can drop into other components. So I'm going to create this over here, new file, and call this single project.view. And then what we'll do is we'll output a single project component here for each project that we cycle through. So let me quickly do that. Let me delete this and say single project like so. Now remember, to do this, we have to import this component into this file. So let me do that inside the script. I want to import single project, and it's from, and we want to go up out of the views folder. Then we want to go into the components folder, and then we want to grab the single project component. So we have that, but we also need to register it right here to say we want to use this component inside our template. So we'll say single project like so. And now this should work. The only thing we need to do is pass in a project into this component. So each time we cycle through the project array, we want to pass in a different project into this so that we have access to it as a prop inside this component, and we can output that project's details. So let's pass it in by binding to a prop. So I'll use colon, and then the prop will be called project, but you can call it what you want, and I'm going to set that equal to project. And that is this thing right here. Because remember, we're cycling through the projects, and for each project we cycle through, we have access to that individual project. So for each one, we're saying, okay, I want you to use the single project component for that project and pass in this prop, which is that project. So now what we need to do is save this and flesh out this component. So to begin with, I'm going to type out view and select the first option to boilerplate the component. Then the template is going to be relatively simple. First, I'll do a div with a class of project, so we can style this. And then this should be project, sorry, not projects. And then inside that, we're going to have 2 separate divs. The first one is going to have a class of actions. Now, this is going to contain the title of the project, but all of the different actions, all of the different icons on the right-hand side of the project, like the trash icon, the edit icon, and the tick. So we'll just do the title for now, and that will be an H3. So inside here, I want to output the project title. Now, before we do that, we need to accept the project right here as a prop. So let us say props, and we want to accept the project. So now I can use that in the template to output the title by saying project.title. Okay, so after that div, and by the way, we will come back to this and output the different icons later on as well. But next I want to do another div, and this is going to be for the project details. So inside here, I'm going to do a paragraph tag and output the project.details. So if we take a look at the data right here, we can see it's this stuff right here that we're outputting. Okay, now this is also going to have a class, and that would be details, just in case we need any CSS for this later on. Now then, what I would like to do is style up this h3 right here and also this project class. So I'm just going to paste in a couple of different styles right here. First of all, we're targeting the project itself. We give this some margin top and bottom, auto left and right. The background is white, a bit of padding, border radius, and a box shadow just to give it some depth. This A right here is the alpha channel, and it means we can pass in an opacity, and it makes it semi-transparent. The border left is this ray pink colour, and it's 4 pixels in width. And this colour denotes that this is not complete. So this is going to be the default border left. Now later on, when we click that tick icon, we're going to change this to green. But for now, everything is going to be considered as not complete to begin with. Now the H3 inside the project, this right here, is going to have a cursor of pointer because I want to be able to click on that and I want the user to know that we can click on that. So let me save this and just preview so far, and it looks something like this. Okay, so it looks quite good, but by default, I don't want to show the details. Now, this is going to be a little challenge for you. So what I'd like you to do is figure out how to hide this by default. And then when we click on this project title, I want you to show this. If we click on this again, I want you to hide this. So it toggles the visibility of the details every time we click on this title. So you have a go of this, pause the video right here, and then when you want to see my solution, just press play again. Alright then, so hopefully you had a good go at that. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to create a data function over here and return an object inside this. And I'm going to create a data property called show details, and this will be a boolean. Now this will be false to begin with, and this is what we're going to toggle to show and hide this div. So what I'll do is apply v-if to this div. I'm going to say v-if is equal to show details, like so. And now only when this is true will this div show. Okay, so by default, if we preview this, it's not going to show. When we click on this title, I want to be able to toggle that show details boolean. So let's add a click event to this h3. At click is equal to. Now we could create a function down here to do that, but instead I'm just going to do it inline because it's only a short bit of code. So I'm going to say that I want to change show details, and I want to set that equal to the reverse of whatever show details currently is. So if show details is false, which it is to begin with, I want to reverse that and then assign that value to show details, so it will become true, and vice versa. When it's true, it will become false. So then it's going to toggle this property from true to false, to true again, to false again, etc. So let's save it and preview. And now if we click on these things, they show and hide the details. Awesome. So now what I'd like to do is place a few icons on the right hand side of each project, and each icon will do a different thing. For example, a trash can icon to delete the project, a pencil to edit it, and a tick to complete it. Now you can use whatever icon you want, but I'm going to be using material icons, which you can find at material.io. Now I will leave this link attached to this lecture so you can view them yourself. And to get started, we're going to click on this developer guide. Now there's actually a few different ways we can set up material icons. We'll be using the icon web font. So scroll down until you see this, and then setup method 1 is just to grab this link tag and paste it in our HTML file. So that's what we'll do. Copy this and then come back over here, go to index.html and place it in the head. Okay, so now we can use any material icon inside our different components. So let's just go back and take a look at these icons. So we can use any of these different icons right here, and I'm going to use this one, this tick, to complete a project called done. So I'm going to click that and then click down here where it says selected icon, and this will give you the HTML snippet you need to use this icon. So I'm going to copy that and then go to our single project component, And inside the actions is where I want to place the icons, but I'm going to place them all inside a separate div with a class of icons, just for stylistic purposes, so we can style things differently later on. And then I'm going to paste in this little snippet and tidy it up. So you can see it's a span, and also it has a class of material icons. Whenever we use a material icon, it has that class, and then this is the name of the icon. So when material icons sees this, it's going to replace it with the little tick. Okay, so we need 2 more of those. So I'm going to duplicate this, and the second one is going to be edit. I'm not going to go and search for it because I know what I'm going to use. Edit, and that looks like a pencil. And then the third one is going to be delete, and that looks like a trash can. And in fact, what I'll do is I'll put the tick or the done right at the end. So let me cut that and paste it right down here. So now we can see we have 3 icons. If we preview this in a browser, we should see those 3 icons right there. Now, I don't want them to be here. I want them to be way over on the right-hand side of the project. So let me first of all come back and style this actions thing right here so that it displays as flexbox. And when something displays as flexbox, it takes the immediate children, which is this h3 and this div, and it puts them next to each other on the same row. So I'm going to come down to the styles and paste in my action selector, display flex, justify content space between. That means it puts space between the thing on the left, which is the h3, and the thing on the right, which is the icons. So we do that, and then align items to the center. That means vertically they align centrally as well. So let me save this and take a look, and that is looking a bit better. Now I also want to style the material icons themselves. So we can see that each one of these has a class of material icons, so we need to target that. And if I scroll down here, I'm going to paste in another style. So we target material icons, we increase the font size, the margin left of each icon is 10 pixels, just to spread them out a little bit. Then the color of each icon is a gray color. The cursor is pointer, so we know we can click them. And then when we hover over them, we deepen the gray color. So if we save that, that looks a bit better. And we can see as we hover over them, they go a bit deeper. Awesome. So we have our icons in place. Next up, I'm going to show you how to delete projects by clicking this icon right here. Okay, so now we have our different icons showing. I'd like to attach a click event to the trash can so that when we click on that, it deletes that project. So let's attach a click event to the delete icon first of all. At click, and set that equal to some kind of method. I'm going to call this delete project, but call it what you want. It really doesn't matter. Now down in the component object, we need to create the methods property, and then inside that, our delete project method. Now, what do we want to do inside here? Well, we want to send a delete request to json-server to a certain endpoint to delete an item from the project. So before we do that, I want to store the endpoint, and I'll call it URI, inside our object right here. And that's so when we're using a fetch request later on, we don't have to type it all out inside that, because we might use several different fetches for several different tasks. We have edit and done right here. So we might alter them in different ways, and I don't want to have to type out the endpoint several times. So I'm storing it once here so we can reuse it. So the endpoint, if we open up the terminal to the project's resource, is this thing right here. So I'm going to copy that and close down the terminal, and I'm going to paste it in right here. Now the endpoint to delete a certain resource is not just / projects, it's / the ID of whatever project we want to delete. Now we have access to that because we have the individual project. So I could tack on this.project.id. Remember, the ID is a property of each project. So that's the endpoint to delete an item. Now we need to send a delete request to that endpoint. So then, what I'm going to do down here is use the fetch API again, and I'm going to pass in this.uri to reference this thing right here. That's the endpoint. But this time, because we're making a delete request, we need a second argument, which is an options object. And inside there, we need a method property to say that this is going to be a delete request. Now, this could be post, it could be get, which is the default, it could be patch, etc. We're making a delete request. So this fetch right here, this makes a delete request to the JSON server at this endpoint. The JSON server will then look for that project with this ID inside our project's resource, and it will delete it. So let me save this first of all, and before we try it, I'm going to copy all of this stuff right here. And the reason I'm copying this is because we're about to delete data, and once we've deleted it, it won't be in here. It's going to edit the file. So I don't want to have to retype out that data later on. I can just paste it back in now. So now let me go over to the project, and if I try to delete one of these projects, then nothing happens, right? It's still here. But if we go to the DB file, it's gone. So why is that change not reflected in the browser? Well, think about it. When we make the fetch request to get this data, it was when the page first loaded, when this component was mounted to the DOM. Now, once we delete a project, we then don't try to refetch the data. And so therefore, we don't update this project array. So it's still here locally. It's been deleted inside the db.json file, but the data is still the same locally inside the home component right here. We've not edited that data. We made the fetch request before we deleted it, and after we deleted it, we've not made a further fetch request, so this is still the same. So we've deleted it in the db.json file, but not locally, and we've got two options here. We could either, after we make a delete request, send a further fetch request to update the data, or what we could do is we could just update the local data to keep it in sync with the db.json data. So if we delete something like this, we then look at the local data and also delete it from there. And that's the option we're going to go for, because then we don't have to make any further network requests. So we need to think for a minute how we're going to accomplish this, because when we delete a project, we then can't access this data from this component. So we can't just update it right here inside this delete project method. But what we could do is we could emit an event, such as a delete event, for example. That's a custom event, and then listen for that delete event over here. We attach that delete event to the single project. Then when that delete event occurs, we could fire a function inside this component to update the project. So that's what we're going to do. So down here, I'm going to attach a then method to this, so we can fire a callback function once we've deleted it from the db.json file. So once that is complete, we could tack on a then method to fire a function right here. Now, we don't need to say we want the response and then JSON, because we're not doing anything with the response now. Instead, all we want to do is emit a custom event to say, hey, we've done the delete now. Now what I want to do is emit the event so you can delete the data locally as well. So we'll say this, and then $emit. This is how we emit a custom event. And then inside that, we give our event a name, and that's going to be called delete, but you can call it what you want. And the second argument, which is any data we want to send along with the event, and that is going to be the ID of the project that we're deleting. We need the ID over here because we're going to use it to take it out of this data as well. So let's pass in this .project to access the project, and then the ID property on that. Okay, so I also want to attach a catch block to this as well, which is going to take in any error if there is one, and we can just log that to the console, like so. Okay, so now we're emitting this custom event. We need to listen to it inside the home component right here. So we can say @delete, that's the name of the event, and set it equal to a function. I'm going to call that handle delete. All right, so now we need to make that down here. We need our methods property first of all, and inside that there is going to be a handle delete function. And remember, we take in any event data automatically, and that is the ID. So this thing right here, and we're calling it ID. You can call it what you want, but it is the ID, so I'm calling it ID. We get access to that as an argument, and all I want to do is filter the projects now, and I want to take out the project which has this ID. So we've seen the filter method, and also if you struggle with the filter method, definitely check out the last chapter of this course. There's a whole video dedicated to it there. So what I'm going to do is say this.projects is equal to, so we can update the value, this this.projects.filter, fire a callback function for each item in the array, and we're taking the individual project as we do that, and we want to return a boolean. If it's true, we keep the item in. If it's false, we filter it out. So I want to return project.id is not equal to ID. So what we're saying is, okay, well, if the ID of the project that we're cycling through is not equal to the ID of this, then this is going to be true, and I want to keep that one in. It's only if the IDs are equal, this will be false, and in that case, we filter it out. So then this filtered array is being assigned to this property right here, and it will no longer contain that project. So now what we're doing is keeping our local data in sync with our DB data over here. All right. So then let me paste back in all of the data. I'm going to save this and I'm going to go try this again. Let me refresh to get all of the data. And now when we click on one of these, it should be deleted over here. And when it's done, it will delete locally as well. Press delete and voila, it works. All right, so that's one icon out of the way. Next up, I'm going to show you how to complete projects using this tick icon. All right then, so now I want to complete projects by clicking this tick over here. And this is going to be a bit more complex than just deleting projects. So let me first of all get all the data back and save that so we can start afresh. And you see this thing right here, this is the property we want to toggle. So when I click on this tick over here, I want to change it to true if it's false. If it's true and I click on the tick, I want to change that property back to false. So it toggles it from true to false and vice versa. So how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, we need to go to single project and attach a click event to the done icon. That's the tick. So let's do that. At click is equal to a method, and I'm going to call this toggle complete. So toggle complete like so. And we need to make that method down here below delete project, toggle complete like so. All right then, so inside here, again, we need to make a fetch request, and it's going to go to the same endpoint, because when we make a request to edit or update the data, it's / the resource name, which we have here, and then / the project ID or resource ID that we want to update. So I'm going to pass in this.uri here, the same endpoint, and this time we're making a patch request. Now, a patch request is when we want to update a certain part of an item. So we don't want to replace the whole item, we just want to update one property. So we make a patch request to do that. So we say the method right here is going to be patch. Okay, so we also now need to add other properties into this object right here, because we need to send updated data with this request. So we need to basically, when we make a patch request, send an object which represents the updates. So we'd send an object with this property and then the updated value. So let me demonstrate this. First, I'm going to move this to the next line like this, so it looks a little easier on the eye. And after method, I'm going to first of all do a headers property. And right here, I'm going to use an object and then say the content type is application / JSON. So this is the headers of the request, and we're just basically saying we're sending some data with this request, and it's going to be of type JSON. That's what this says right here. So we need that. And then after that, we also want to send the data, and that goes in the body property. So here it needs to be JSON data that we send. So we say json.stringify, and then we pass in an object here. And what this method does is it stringifies the object and turns it into a JSON string. And that's how we send JSON back and forth between a server and client. So I'm going to pass in an object right here. And this object is going to have a complete property. And I'm going to set that equal to the reverse of whatever the current value is for that project. So I can say this.project.complete, and that will get me the current value of complete on this project that we already have. Now I want to reverse it, so all I need to do is place the exclamation mark in front of it. And now if the project is currently completed and it's true, then the new value will be false. and if it's currently false, the new value will be true. So this is how we make a patch request. We send an object with only the updated properties. We don't need to send all the other properties in because we're not doing anything to those. We just send in an object of the things we want to update. And then we stringify that using json.stringify to make it into a JSON string, because that's just a JavaScript object as it is. And we can't send JavaScript objects between the client and the server. It has to be a JSON string, the transfer of data. So that's all there is to it. That's the fetch request to go out and make that patch to the data. Now then, I'm going to save this and I'm going to try it. So if we come over here and refresh to get all the data back, I'm going to click, let me just see this. If I go to the data, I'm going to make them both false to begin with, so we know they're both not completed. So now if we come over here and try this, I'm going to click this one over here. And if we take a look, we can see that now this is true. And the same goes for this. If we click this one, now this is true. But if we try to click them again, watch this. If I click this, then it's still true. Now, why is that? Well, again, it's because the data is updated now, but the local data hasn't been updated. So according to this, it's still not completed. And when we click on it, it's still reversing that and then saving it as true again. So again, we need to make sure that our local data is in sync with our db.json data. So we're going to do the same thing as we did over here for the delete, where we emitted a custom event. We're going to do the same thing down here. So let me attach a then block to this, which fires a callback function. And inside this callback function, we want to emit a custom event. So this dot $emit, and then we'll give this event a name of complete. And then we also need to pass the ID of the project that we're completing so that we can then in the home component update that in here. So let's do that. So it's this.project.id. Okay, so we're emitting that custom event now. Now I also want to attach a catch block to this as well, catch the error, and then we'll just log it to the console like so. Okay. So then now we need to listen for this event, this complete event, inside the home component. So let me go up to the top and I'm going to say at, and then it's called complete. And I'm going to call this function handle complete like so. Now down here we need to make this method, so handle complete, and again we automatically take in the ID as a parameter. Alright, so in here again we need to try and update this data. Now this time we don't want to filter, we don't want to take anything out of the data. All we want to do is update the complete property of one of the objects. So we need to be able to find a certain object inside this array, and to do that we'll be using the find method, which is an array method. Now again, if you don't understand the find method, I've got a whole video explaining it in the last chapter of this course, so go there if you need more information. But let us carry on. I'm just going to call it P, this local project that we're going to try and find, and I'm going to set that equal to this.projects and then use the find method on that. Now this fires a callback function for each of the items inside the projects, and if we return true, then it gets us that project, and that's what we store in here. And if we return false, it just goes to the next one. So for each callback function, we pass in the project that we're currently iterating. So it goes through the first project, then the second, then the third, etc. And each time we get access to it, much like the filter method. So inside here, we want to return project.id is equal to the ID. So this is going to either be true or false. It will be true if the ID matches the project ID, so the current iteration. So if we return true on that, we return that project to P, and now we're storing it inside here. And all we need to do is update a property on that. So let's do that. I'm going to say down here P and then access the complete property, which every project has, and I'm going to set that equal to reverse of whatever it currently is. So exclamation P dot complete. So now what we're doing is we are updating the external data, and then when we've done that, we emit a custom function to update the local data right here as well, and hopefully now it will be kept in sync. So that means that when we click it twice, it will go to true first of all, then back to false. So let me refresh and let's see what it currently is. So currently it's true for both. If we click on this, then it's going to go to false, and the same for the other one. And if we click on these again, it should go back to true, fingers crossed. Yes, it does. It works. Awesome. So now it just toggles those properties. Now there's one more thing I want to do, and that is to style the completed projects slightly differently. So ideally, each completed project should have a left border that is green and not this pinky red. So let us go back into the single project, and we're going to output a conditional class right here on this project. So remember, to do that, we can bind to the class attribute, and it doesn't matter that we already have a class. We're just applying additional classes here. And when we do conditional classes or dynamic classes, this is going to be an object where each key is the class we want to apply to it. And if the value is true, it gets that class. If it's false, then it doesn't get that class. So I'm going to apply a class of complete to this if the complete property is true. So all we need to do is say, okay, evaluate the project that we have. And remember, we can use that in the template because it's a prop, and then look at the complete value on that project. So if this is true, then it gets this complete class. If it's false, then it won't. So now we can style this project differently if it also has the complete class. So let's come down here to the styles, and I'm just going to paste this in. So the class of project, which also has a class of complete, we update the border left to be this color, which is green, instead of the default, which is this reddy color. So now if we save that, you can see that they're both green, and that means they're both complete. But if we click on one of these and it goes back to red, that means it's not complete. And the same for this. And if we click it again, it's completed, etc. So that's pretty nice. It would be nice if we could do something similar for this tick. And to do that, we're going to have to apply a class to that icon that is unique. So it's this one right here. And we'll give it a class of tick. And all I want to do is give this the same color as this border down here if the project is complete. So I could say project.complete, and then I want the tick class, and I want to give this a specific color, which is going to be this right here. So I can say color is that hex code. All right, so now if the project is complete, we take the tick icon and we give it this color. So let's try that, and we can see that now it's complete, and if we click it, this goes back to normal and this goes back to red. So that is pretty nice. So next up, I'm going to show you how to add new projects. Alright then, so now we can complete projects and also delete them. I'd like to show you how to add new projects, and for that we're going to need a form whereby a user can enter in a title and some details as well, and then when they submit it, it sends a request to add that data. So the first step is to create that form, and that's going to go in another view. So let me create a new file, and this will be called add project.view. And inside here, I'm going to boilerplate it by typing out view and selecting this first option. All right, so let's do the template. We're just going to do a form and take away the action. And inside the form, we'll need a couple of different input fields. I'm going to do a label for each one, and the first one is going to be for the title. So that is the title of the project. Now this needs an input field which will be of type text, and then also I'm going to make sure that this is required. We will use vModel on this in a second as well. Now we need a label for the details, so let's create that. Details. And then under that I'm going to use not an input field but a text area, like so. Now we don't need any of this stuff right here. We're going to style it in the CSS. So let's get rid of all that, and then the text area is going to also be required. And by the way, we can still use a vModel with text area much the same way we can do with input fields. So now let's create the data down here so we can hook vModel up to these two fields. So data function, which returns an object, and inside the object we need a title property, which will be an empty string to begin with, and also we need a details property, which is going to be an empty string to begin with. Now we can attach vModel to each of these to track what a user types into them. So title for the first one, and then down here, v-model is equal to details for the second one. Okay. So now we're tracking what a user types into these things. We also want to let them submit the form. So we'll do a button at the bottom which says add project. Okay. So to listen to the submit event, we go to the form and we say at submit and set it equal to some kind of function. So this is going to be handle submit. But remember, we need to prevent the default action of a form being submitted, which is the reloading of the page. So to do that, I'm going to say dot prevent right here, and that prevents that default action. Okay, so we need our methods now. And inside the methods property, we need our handle submit method. And all we're going to do inside this is log to the console the different values. So this dot title and this dot details. Okay, so that's the bare bones of this project. Now we need to make a route for this component. So let's go to our router file, and after this one, we'll say the path is going to be /add to go to this page. The name is going to be add project, and then the component we want to load is going to be add project. We also need to import that at the top. So let's do that right here. Instead of home, it should be add project, like so. All right, so let me now save this and preview it over here by going to /add. And now we can see this form, and it looks terrible. So let's add some styles to this form. And what I'm going to do is just copy all of these styles from my repo, because again, I really don't think you want me to type out CSS from scratch and waste your time. Let me go to add project. I will walk you through these quickly though. So basically what we're doing is taking the form and just applying a background color of white, some padding and a border radius. Label is displayed as block, color of a light gray, uppercase. We reduce the font size and we make it bold. A bit of letter spacing and margin top and bottom, 10 pixels and 20 pixels. And the input field, we gave 10 pixels of padding. We strip away the border, we give it a border bottom only, which is light grey. The width is 100%, and the box sizing is border box. So the whole width takes into consideration the padding and the border. The text area, very similar. Border is 1 pixel solid all the way around this time though. Padding of 10 pixels, width 100%, border box, and a height of 100 pixels. And then finally, the button, which is display block. Margin top and bottom of 20 pixels, or rather just at the top of 20 pixels, 0 at the bottom, auto left and right. The background is that green color. The color of the text is white, bit of padding, border 0, border radius of 6 pixels, and the font size is 16 pixels. And remember, if you want to get all of these styles, all you need to do is head on over to the course files, which are on GitHub, and you just need to select the lesson 63 branch and find the correct file, add project. They're all down here, so you can just copy and paste them. All right, so now hopefully this is going to look a bit better if we save it. And voila, it does look better. So let's see if this works. I'm just going to inspect because we're logging these things to the console and blah, blah, load of junk, add project, and we can see it right here. So the next step is to then make a post request to add this as a new project in this data, and we'll tackle that next. Alright then, so now we have our web form to add a new project, and if we click on add project, all we're doing is logging the title and the details to the console. Instead, it would be nice to take that, create a new project and save it to our db.json file over here. So we can do that by making a post request to an endpoint. So let's go to the add project component, and inside here, instead of just logging this to the console, let's instead, first of all, create a project object. And I'm going to set that equal to an object with a title property, and that is going to be this.title. So this data right here. We also need a details property, which will be this.details. And then remember, we have two other properties inside our objects. We have complete right here and ID. Now, when we're working with json-server, we don't need to add an ID property ourselves right here. When we make that post request, json-server will handle that and add a unique ID for us. And this one right here, complete, we should probably set to be false to begin with, since they've just created the project. So we'll say complete and that will be false. And like I say, json-server will add the ID property for us. But anyway, now we have this project. Let me just log it to the console so we can see it first of all. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to open up the console over here. I'm just going to type in a lot of old junk, add project, and now we can see this object with those 3 properties. So now I want to take that object and save it to this DB file over here. And we're going to do that using a fetch request. So let's say fetch, and what is the endpoint for a post request? Well, it's just this thing right here, /projects, or whatever the resource is called. We don't need to say /ID because the ID of that project doesn't exist yet, so it doesn't make sense. It's just /projects. This is what we send a post request to. So I'm going to paste that in right here, and we need a second object because we want to define the method and also a couple of other things. So let me say method is going to be post, and then the second thing I need is the headers property. And remember, this is so I can say the content type that we're going to send is JSON. All right, so we have to add that on to say that we're sending some data and it's of type JSON. And thirdly, we need to say what the data is that we want to send, and that goes in the body. And again, we have to stringify this by saying json.stringify. This is how we send JSON data. And all we need to do is pass in our JavaScript object, the project that we created right here. So now we're sending this as JSON to the endpoint, and json-server is going to look at that and save that new document or new object for us inside this db.json file. Okay, so let's give this a whirl. I'm going to come over here and I'll say make a new website and blah blah blah. I'm going to add the new project, and nothing happens here, but if we now take a look at db.json, we can see this new object over here, and it automatically has an ID of 3. json-server did that for us. So this has worked, but we also want to be able to do something once this has happened. We don't just want to sit on this page because a user would have no idea that they've actually added a project. How about instead we redirect them to the home page once this is done right here? So let's try that. I'm going to tack on a then method right here to say fire a function when this is done. Now, I don't need to take in the response object because we're not going to do anything with that. All I want to do is do something once the fetch post request is complete. And the thing I want to do is say this dot router, and we're going to redirect them. So we use the push method to push another route into the history. And the route we want to go to is just /. Now, we could use an object here instead to say we want to go to the home component, but really this is quicker for me, so I'm just going to use /, and that does the same thing. It goes to this route. Now also I'm going to tack on a catch block to fire a callback function which takes in the error if there is one, just in case there's a problem with that, and we'll log that to the console. Alright then, so this is pretty much all done. I'm going to go back to db.json and delete that one we just created so we can add it again. And if I come over here, I'm going to say design a new website, and then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to just paste some lorem ipsum in here, add the project. Now it redirects us to the home page once it's done, and we can see that new project right here and the details. Cool. And just to make sure we can do things with this, we can complete it, and also we can delete it. Awesome. Now we have 2 different routes. We have the home page and also the add route, which is the web form. I'd like to add a little navigation at the top. So to do this, we're going to create a new component called navbar, and I'm going to place that inside the components folder over here because it doesn't really belong in the views folder. It's not a view, it's just a drop-in component. So I'm going to create it in here, call it navbar.view. Okay, so inside this, I'm going to type in view and then enter to get this boilerplate. And then the template, first of all, I'll create a nav. And in fact, we'll give this a class. And that is going to be main-nav. Inside the nav, we just want 2 links. We've got the home page and we've got the add project page. So let's do a router link to each one. I'm going to close off this first of all. And then I'm going to duplicate it. And I need a 2 attribute on this one. And don't forget, we're going to bind to these so we can use an object. And inside here, we're going to say the name of the component is home. So this is the link to the home route, and we'll just say projects for that. And then down here, I'm going to do the same thing. This time, the name of the component is going to be add project, like so. And then in here, we'll say add a new project. All right then, so now we have this HTML. Let's drop this component into the root component over here, app.vue. So first of all, we need our script tag. So let's do that, script. And then inside, we can import the navbar. And that is from // to say the current directory, then into components. Then we want the navbar.vue file. All right, so now we need our component object. So we'll say export default. And inside is where we register the different components we want to use inside this component. So all we want to do is use the navbar like so. And then we can just nest it above the router view. So navbar like so. Dead simple. And now if we save this and come over here, we can see this navbar at the top. We have add new project and projects. So that works, but it looks terrible. So let's add some CSS. So to do that, we're going to go back to the navbar component, and I'm just going to paste this in. Now then, just a few little styles. So the main nav, first of all, which is this, we're saying align the text to the center. So it's going to sit in the middle over here. And then the margin is 40 pixels top and bottom, auto left and right. The anchor tags inside that, and remember, that's these things because when they're output to the DOM, they become anchor tags. So we're styling those and we say inline blocks, so they sit next to each other. Text decoration none to remove the underline. Bit of margin to the left and right. A color of a lightish gray, and then we increase the font size a tiny bit. Now, when we get the active class, remember, when we're on a particular route, the link gets that active class. When we get that, we're going to style it a bit differently by giving it a border bottom, which is this color, and a bit of padding bottom as well. So if I save this now and preview, we can see this is an active link. And if we click over here, that's the active link. So that looks a little bit better now. Alright then, so this is taking shape now, but we have one more icon to sort out, and that is this edit icon right here. Now, when a user clicks that, I want to take them to an edit screen, which is going to look very much like this, but it's also going to pre-populate what the current title and details are inside these two different fields. So first of all, let's create an edit project view, and then we'll hook it up with our Vue router. So let's do that inside here. We'll call it edit project.vue. And then inside that, I'm just going to boilerplate this template. And inside the template, we'll just do an H1 that says edit project. We'll delete that later and replace it with the form. But for now, just so we know we've landed on that page, we'll have that simple template. All right. So now inside our router index file, we need to add a route to this component. So we'll say the path is going to be /projects and then /. We need a route parameter now to say what project we want to edit. So we go to /projects I don't know, 1 if we want to edit this project, or /2 if we want to edit that project. And we need that route parameter because when we're on the edit screen, we need to reach out and get that document or get that object from our db.json file. All right, so that's the reason we need that route parameter. So we're going to call this ID, :ID. And next we need to give this a name, which will be edit project. And then after that, we say the component, which will be edit project, like so. But we need to import that. So I'll duplicate this and change this and this to edit project. All right. So that should all be working now, but we also need to make this little icon a link to that page and pass in the route parameter for that project as well. So let's go to the single project, which is where we output a single project on the screen. And it's this icon right here that we need to link. So we need to place this inside a router link. Let's create that tag, router-link, and close it off. And inside we want to place this span. So let's cut it from there and paste it in here. All right then. So now we want to go to the edit project components, but we also want to pass in a route parameter. And remember, in order to do that, we just pass in a params property, which is an object, and inside here the name of the parameter, in our case it's ID, that's what we called it right here, and the value of that is going to be the ID from whatever project we have passed in right here as a prop. So we have access to that project object, we can just access the ID property from it. So project.id, like so. So let's see if this works. I'm going to go over here and click on this, and it goes to /projects/1, and we see this edit project. And if we go back and click on this one, then it's not working. Let's try refreshing. Click it. Okay, now it's working, and this one is /2. Awesome. So now we just need our form right here to actually edit the project. So I'm going to just head on over to the add project component and grab this form right here, because this form and the edit form are actually going to be pretty identical. They both have the same fields, the title and the details. Now I want to get rid of the submit handler for now, because we'll do that later on. And what I'd also like to do is create data properties for these V models, title and details, so we can track what a user types into them. So let's create our data function, which returns an object, and inside we need a title, which will start as an empty string, and also we need details, which will start as an empty string. So now we have those two, but also I would like to be able to show what the current values are for the project. So if I save this at the minute, I'm going to go back to projects, and if I click on this, I would like to see this title and these details pre-populated inside these form fields. And we're going to do that by querying our database for the project with the ID of this route parameter right here. Now, in order to access this, I want to accept it as a prop in my component. And remember, to accept a route parameter as a prop in a component, we have to say that is allowed inside the route object. And to do that, we say props true. So now if we pass in a route parameter into this component, we can accept it as a prop. So now inside single project, I'm going to go, oops, not single project, sorry, edit project. I'm going to go over here and say we want props, and the prop is going to be the ID. So we have access to this ID prop now, and we can use that to make a fetch request to the data for the project with the ID. And we're going to do that inside the mounted hook, which is when this component has mounted the DOM. So after we have the form on the page, then we're going to go and try and load the data for that project and pre-populate it. So in here, we just need to make a fetch request. And what I'm going to do is store the URI again inside this URI property in the component data. Now the URI is just this thing here, and then / the ID of the project that we want to get. So we're getting just a single project. This gets all of them. We want to say / and then tack on this .id. This to reference the component, and then the prop ID from that component. So that's our endpoint, and we want to pass that in here, the fetch request. We don't need the second object right here because we're just performing a get request and we're not sending any data, but we can tack on a then method because this is asynchronous. It takes some time to do, returns a promise. When it returns to us, we fire the function inside the then block, and this function takes in the response object. Now remember, we want the data of this, so we have to pass the response into JSON, so response.json, like so. And that's asynchronous, so we tack on another then method, and inside here we have the actual data, and this will be the project. So what I'm going to do is just log this to the console to begin with, so console.log, and we want to log the data, just so we can see that. Let me open up the console over here. We have an error at the minute, so we'll see what that is. Scroll up here, and it says URI is not defined. Of course it's not. This must be this.uri because we're referencing some data, schoolboy error. So let me save that now and come over here. I'm going to refresh, And now we can see this is the project right here. It has an ID of 1, which is the route parameter. And we have the title and the details and whether it's complete. So we can output now the title and the details right here. And the way we're going to do that is by updating these properties. Because if these change, then it will change the values inside of here and here because we're using Vue model. And that's two-way data binding. So let's update those right here instead of logging this to the console. This.title is equal to data.title, and then this.details is equal to data.details. So we need these on a new line. Now we're updating these two properties right here with the data we get back, and hopefully now that will pre-populate these fields. So let me save that and come over here, and now we can see this is pre-populated. If we go back to projects, we can choose this one, edit it, and it's pre-populated with that data. Okay, so there's one more change we need to make here, and that's the text inside this button, because this should be update project now instead of add project. So let's change that, update project and save, and that looks better. So next up, we're going to see how to click on this button to update the project if we make changes. Alright then, so it's time for another challenge, and this one's going to be a little bit more difficult than the ones we've done so far because we are further along in the course, so I do want to challenge you a bit more. And what I'd like you to do this time is actually update the project when we submit the form. So to do this, you're going to have to add a submit handler to the form to update this project. Inside that, I want you to make a fetch patch request to the URI we have here to update the project over here. And remember, we've seen patch requests before. We use those to update just certain properties inside documents or objects in the data. And then when you're done, when it's done that, I want you to redirect to the home page. So pause the video now, have a good go at this, and then if you want to see my solution, just press play again. Okay then, so the first thing I'm going to do is attach a submit event to the form. And remember, we have to prevent the default action, so we use the event modifier prevent to do that. We set that equal to some kind of method we want to fire. I'm going to call that handle submit, and then we need to create that down here inside the methods property. Handle submit. Okay, so inside here now we want to make a fetch request, and it's to this endpoint right here. So let's say fetch and pass in this.uri, and we also have to pass in that second argument, the object, to say that the method will be a patch request. Now also we need to specify the headers because we're sending some data and we want to say that we're sending JSON data. So again, the headers is an object where the content type that we're sending is application JSON. So next we need the body, which is where we actually send the data, and we need to stringify this, so json.stringify, and we pass in the changes that we want to make. Now the changes we want to make are just the title and the details. So we say that the title will be this.title, so whatever this value is right here. And remember, if a user updates it, then because of Vue model that we have right here, it updates over here. So this will always match what's in the input field, and same for details. So that's the new value we want to save to the title property. And the other one we want to update is the details, and that will be this.details. And again, remember, we don't have to pass through the other properties like the ID or the complete status, because when we make a patch request, we only send the properties that we want to update, and it updates those ones. So that's all there is to it. Now, we want to do something when this is complete. So let's tack on a then method, which fires a function when it's complete. And inside that function, I want to redirect the user back to the home page. So I'm going to say this.router, and don't forget your $, and then .push to push on a new route, and it's just to the home page, so /. Again, I want to add on a catch block just in case there is an error, and we'll fire that in a callback function by logging it to the console. Alright, so now this is all done. So we handle the submit when a user submits the form up here. We make a patch request to this endpoint, which includes the ID of the document that we want to update. And then the body over here contains the updates that we want to make, and we stringify those. And once it's done, we redirect to the home page, and then we catch any errors if there are any. So let me save this and preview. I'm going to go back to the projects page, refresh. I'm going to go to create a new homepage banner. I'm going to edit this and I'm going to just put again right here, and then I'm just going to paste this in a few more times as well so it's a bit more content. Okay, so let's try updating this now. Update the project, and we can see it's updated right there. And by the way, when we do this, when we add a project or when we edit a project and then it redirects to the home page, it's refetching the data because the home component right here is re-rendering, and so therefore we're refetching the data when it mounts, so it gets the updated data. All right, so we've done that now. We've done all of these three things. We can edit, we can delete, and we can complete different projects. The next thing I want to do is create a filter nav at the top over here, so we can filter the project by completed or not completed. So now what I'd like to do is create a filter navigation at the top over here, so we can filter the projects by completed or by ongoing, which would be the red one, or by all, so we show all of them. So the first thing to do is create a component for this, and I'm going to create it in components over here and call it filter nav.view. Okay, so let's type out view and press enter to get this boilerplate, and let's do the template first. I'm going to do a nav with a class of filter-nav so we can style it later on, and inside I want three buttons. I want a button for all, I want a button for viewing completed, and a button for viewing ongoing. So let's create a button first of all, and we'll say view all. Now then, I want to attach a click event to this to update the filter. So what I'll do is say @click and set that equal to a method called update filter. Now I don't have that method down here, so I'm going to create it by saying methods, and inside that I'm going to create one called update filter, like so. Now what I want to do is pass in an argument into this, and that argument is going to be something like all, because I want to update the projects that we show, but I want them to be all the projects, so I can check for that value later on. So I'm going to do something very similar for the other buttons, and in fact what I'm going to do is return this onto a new line, and sometimes I do this when I'm attaching a few things to an element so it's more readable. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it down here a couple of times. So this time, instead of view all, we will say completed, and this time the argument is going to be completed, and then down here it will be ongoing, the argument, if I can spell it, and over here it will be ongoing. So we have three buttons, right? And when we click on one of those buttons, we fire this update filter method, and we pass in an argument to say what we want to filter by. So we can take that in as an argument here. I'm going to call it by because that's what we're filtering by, but you can call it what you want. Now at this point what I'd like to do is emit an event, because I want to listen for that event in the home component where we're eventually going to nest the filter nav, so I can react to that filter changing. And when I react to that filter changing, it's at that point that I can go ahead and filter the project based on that criteria. So I'm going to say this dot $emit to emit an event. I'm going to call the event filter change, and I'm also going to pass some data, and that is the by argument. So whatever this value is right here. So if I click on this one, it will be completed. If I click on this one, it will be ongoing. And then when I listen for that event over here, I can use that bit of information to determine how to filter these projects. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and now I want to drop it into this component. So first of all, we need to import it. So I'm going to duplicate this and change single project to filter nav. And then I need to register it here, filter nav. And I want to put it inside this template. So it's going to go at the top inside the home div like this, filter nav. Okay then, so remember we have to listen for that filter change event. So I'm going to say @filter change and set it equal to something. Now this thing that we want to set it equal to, all I want to do is basically track what that value is. So I'm going to store a value down here called current, and that is basically the current filter. And to begin with, I'm going to say it's all. That is the default filter. So when we first load the page, we're going to show all projects. So that's the current one. And all I'm going to do inside here is update that value, because if we click on this button, for example, then we're going to emit the filter change event, and we're going to pass this argument up as the data. So what I'd like to do is set then current to completed, to whatever data we pass up. So let's do that. I'm going to say current is equal to $events. And this $event, that is the data that we send up right here. When we send up data, we can access that right here, and it's called $event. So I'm setting it equal to that value, and this will now update. Now what I want to do is just preview this in a browser, and we can see it doesn't look great. So I'm going to apply a few styles to this now, which I'm just going to copy from my repo. So let's paste those in down here. And all we're doing is styling the buttons inside the filter nav. So they have no background, no border, a color of this gray color, no outline, a small font size, uppercase, bit of margin right to space them out, a letter spacing, a font weight of bold, and a cursor of pointer so we know to click them. If we save that again and look at it, all right, cool. So we can see that now. So every time we click one of these now, we are emitting an event and sending that data, which is either all, completed, or ongoing. And we're accepting that event over here, listening for it. And when that occurs, we set the current filter equal to whatever value we emit right here, either all, completed, or ongoing. So now we're tracking what the current filter is inside this property. We're not filtering any projects yet, but we are tracking it inside that property. So every time we click on one of those, we're changing that current property. All right. Now, in this lesson, I want to do one more thing, and that is to send this as a prop, this current value, into the filter nav, because then what I could do is I could style the buttons conditionally based on that prop. So if something is active, for example, if the value of current is all, and we receive that as a prop inside this, I can check, look, is the value of current or the prop equal to all? If it is, I'm going to style it a bit different, because this would be the active class. If it's completed, I want to style this one to be the active filter. All right. So let's do this. I'm going to send it in as a prop over here by doing some data binding. And we're going to send in a prop called current and set it equal to be current, which is this thing. And remember, that changes every time we click on a different filter. So if I save that and come over here, I can accept it as a prop by saying props and current, like so. Now I want to conditionally output some different classes based on this value. So let me come to each button, and I'm going to go to the next line, and we'll data bind to class and set it equal to an object, whereby the key is the conditional class. The value is a Boolean, which we can evaluate. If that Boolean is true, we apply the class. If it's false, we don't apply the class. So I want to give it conditionally a class of active, but only if the current prop is equal to all, because that's what this button signifies. So if the current filter is all, then this right here is the current filter. And I want to style that a bit differently. So I apply the active class to it. I'm going to do something similar for each one of these down here, but this time current must be completed, and then down at the bottom, current must be ongoing. So they only get these active classes if the current value matches what they represent, and therefore only one of them at a time can have that active class. So now let's style this active class down here. I'm just going to paste this in from my repo, and we can see filter nav button dot active, and we give this a slightly darker color. So if I save this, we can see by default, because the current class over here is all, and we pass that in, this right here at the top is true, and therefore we get the active class. Now, if I click on completed, then it updates the value of current, and now this is true. So this gets the active class, and so forth. All right. So now we know which filter is active, and we have this current property down here tracking that filter. Next up, we want to be able to filter the project based on the current filter we have here. Alright then, so time for the final challenge of this project, and what I'd like you to do is basically update the projects that we output right here by creating a computed property called filtered projects. And filtered projects will return an array of projects which match the current filter. Remember, we're tracking the current filter down here, and that will either be all, completed, or ongoing. So that computed property needs to evaluate that value and filter the projects based on that value. Remember, we have in the data this completed property right here, which we can use to perform that evaluation. So then we cycle through the computed property, filtered projects instead of projects, and we only output those. And every time this current value updates, when we cycle through these, then we get that relevant list of projects. So that's what I'd like you to do. Have a good go at this. Pause this video, and then when you're ready, you can press play again to see my solution. Alright then, so now the first thing I'm going to do is come down here and create a computed property, and that computed property is called filtered projects. So this is eventually going to return an array of projects. Now that's either going to be all the projects if all is the current filter, or it could be the completed project if this is the current filter, or all the ongoing projects if this is the current filter. So I need to evaluate this value right here. So down here I'm going to do an if check, and I'm going to say if this.current, which gets me the current value, is equal to completed, in that case I want to return an array where I only show the projects whereby this is true. So in this case, it would be just this project. So let me do this. I'm going to come back to the home component, and I need to return a value. That's going to be an array, and I'm going to return this.projects.filter because we're going to filter this, and we fire a callback function for each project, and we're taking that project each time as an argument. And inside this function, I just want to return project.complete, because if this is true, it means the project is completed, and when we return true, that project stays in the array. So it will stay in the filtered array. If this is false, then we will filter that out of the returned array right here. So now we're returning a filtered array with only the completed projects. So now let's do the second one. I'm going to copy this, and this time I want to say if this.current is equal to ongoing, like so, and all I need to do is place an exclamation mark in front of this. And now this is going to get me all the projects inside an array where completed is false, because if this is false, when we place an exclamation mark in front of it, it means this statement is true. So it's only now keeping items in the array if it's not completed. So in that case, we're returning an array of all projects which are not completed. The final case is if current is all, and in that case, I just want to return all of the projects. I don't need to do an if check really. All I need to do at the bottom is say return this.projects, like so. Now, why do we not need to do an if check for all? Well, because we're going from top to bottom. If it's completed, then we're going to return right here, and it doesn't go any further. If it's not completed, it's going to go onto this if check. If it's ongoing, it's going to return a value here, and we don't go any further. If it's not ongoing, it means that it must be all. And so in that case, well, we'll just return all the projects. So now we have this filtered project array right here, this computed property, which we can cycle through up here instead of projects. So I'm going to say now filtered projects instead of projects. And now that's either going to be a filtered array where they're all complete, a filtered array where they're not complete, or just all the projects. So let me save this, and we can see we're on all at the minute. If I go to completed, we only see the completed one. If I go to ongoing, we only see the ongoing one. If I add a new one, just a load of junk, go to completed, we just see this one. Go to ongoing, we see both of those. If I click the tick right here, then it's removed from ongoing and it goes into completed. So there we go, my friends. That is this project pretty much complete. In the next chapter, we're going to take a huge step forward and start to look at the new Vue 3 stuff, the really meaty stuff in Vue 3, and that's going to start with the composition API.